Thank you, Mike. Very passionate and challenging opening session for us. I think it's set the tone for hopefully the rest of the day now. Delighted now on your behalf to welcome our first guest speaker, Linda Bellos, Director of Diversity Solutions. Her CV is in your pack, so do take time to read it. A couple of highlights I would pick out. The first black woman to join the Spare Rib Feminist Collective in 1981, elected leader of Lambeth Council in 1986, introduced Black History Month, and awarded an OBE in 2007 for services to diversity. So I think we're very lucky to have Linda. Warm welcome.
Thank you. I was wondering whether I might ask, but I think I won't do it, but I'll tell you what was thinking about asking. Everybody was heterosexual to indicate, but I think I won't do it because it might be embarrassing. I tell you what, I am a little disappointed that your History Month thing didn't have the fact that in 1986 I was the first out lesbian leader of a local authority. I think it is significant. The fact that I am, not was, am black, of African origin, is also of relevance to me. But it would be fair to say I got a bit of stick from the Daily Mail. They came to me. I chose not to put my sexuality on my kind of political CV. I didn't think people were voting for me on the grounds of who I loved, but actually my capacity to provide better housing, etc., etc. But I got doorstepped by one Anthony Doran. Some of you may be familiar with the old git. And he came with a cutting of something I'd written when I worked at the GLC. I think my greater claim to fame, never mind being the first black but lesbian, to be an out lesbian. I'm sure I wasn't the first lesbian. The first out lesbian. Well, I worked at the GLC in 1984, and I think that I had a job which the first in local government in which the word lesbian occurred. My role was team leader of equalities and grants monitoring, and I was responsible for making sure that the £17 million budget of the women's unit was spent fairly and that provided services to LGBT, well, it wasn't LGBT then, it was actually lesbians, bi, and I'm not sure what position we had on trans then, probably rather hostile, if I'm honest with you. He doorstepped me. I'd said in an article for the GLC that becoming a lesbian was probably one of the most important decisions I made in my life. Many of us who are lesbian or gay or bi or trans can be and are, but we probably discreetly don't tell the world. Doesn't alter who we are, except to the extent to which not being able to be all of the things you are can be very, very restrictive on a person, on a human being. And there's something wonderful about being out, and I wrote about this. So this guy doorstepped me. What did I think about it? And I said, I'd been leader for about a couple of days. And I said, come back in a year's time and tell me whether our home care provision for the elderly has improved. Tell me whether repairs have improved in housing. And I went through a list of things that were really priorities for me and, frankly, for voters. He went away, and I think it was a kind of salutary lesson because he expected me to be defensive. And he wrote a really rather nice piece about my plans politically to improve the quality of the services that Lambeth Council delivered. People said to me afterwards, what did you do to Tony? I said, I told him the bleeding truth. Anyway, moving on, we are some distance from those days, those dark days of the mid-1980s in which 2 years later, many of us will remember Clause 28, 29, Section 28, the long campaign we had against what was pure prejudice. I have yet to hear one instance in which Clause 28, or Section 28, was invoked against a local authority. Does anybody know of one instance in which this fabulous piece of legislation was used successfully by the government? Because I'm not aware of any. So here was a huge, massive waste of public money to bring in a clause which had the effect of silencing a significant section of British society. We are in different times, and I think even with the changed government, we are still in very different times. And it is, however, disappointing to note that our new Home Secretary is one who voted for Section 28. Never mind, things move on and people change. That's a good thing. And in this context, you as civil servants cannot and should not be political. Actually, I must tell you another anecdote. 1972 to 77, I worked in, some of you may know, Lanarshon, PD6. I was a tax officer for 5 years. And I learned a great deal, and I'm very grateful. And now I'm only being pursued by HMRC for paying my blasted corporation tax, but that's another matter. What I want to say about, and I have to be mindful of the time because I can speak for a long time without, I don't know about the repetition or hesitation, but I can, I enjoy public speaking. You say you have 600 members. I think that you should be exceedingly proud that you have 600 members. Actually, potentially, you have possibly 6,000 members. The challenge for you is to create the environment in which it is possible for people to identify those further 5,400, so I still haven't lost my maths, can identify and can be out and proud of being L, G, B, and T. I don't believe that we should make an emotional or moral argument for equality. I continue to argue that we should make the, never mind the business case, I'm not even desperately interested in that, we should actually make the legal case. It is the fact that as from October this year, new rights, duties and responsibilities will fall upon all citizens, particularly those who work who provide services and who provide, and this is one of the services, some people don't like it, you know that, don't you? We have responsibilities to ensure that we do not treat people less favourably or unfavourably because they are, or think they are, or might be, because that the provision of perception, L, G, B, or T. There are a couple of things, specific things I want to say about less favourable treatment. I think we must move away from trying to change people's hearts and minds and focus upon their actions. It is their actions in the workplace that is of relevance. Personally, I don't give a damn whether somebody likes me or doesn't like me. What I do insist upon, that if I'm paying for a service, I expect to receive that service fairly, not less favourably than other people, not with impoliteness, etc. And that's in relation to my ethnicity, my gender, my sexual orientation, my age. Don't care, these are particular boxes that I can tick. I'm 60 this year, I'm proud to say. So I shall get my freedom pass in a few months. Whatever the nature of the service, I don't feel an obligation to try to get somebody to like me. What I insist upon, however, is that I am treated with the same respect that should be accorded any citizen. Isn't that reasonable? And it's the basis on which I believe that we should go forward to argue for equality and parity within the workplace. I don't want somebody to patronise me. I don't want somebody to feel sorry for me. I want somebody to do their job properly, consistent with the law, which is whatever their personal feelings, they will put them aside and act in a professional manner to deliver fair and equitable services to all citizens. The law specifically says that we shall not be treated less favourably. What that really means is we must empower ourselves to recognise if we are being treated less favourably. Now, I spend my time, I earn my living, in fact, giving advice, guidance, training on equality and diversity. One of the things I have noticed in the last 25 years, because I've been using the Race Relations 76 Act, the Sex Discrimination Act, I've been using the law and reading, this is just one of the pieces of statutory guidance, you see how big it is, not clever, and the Act is even bigger, and the other pieces of guidance are I read them. Sometimes we have made the mistake in the past of being offended because somebody doesn't like us. There is nothing in law that compels one individual to like another. It's not the path down which we should go. What we should be doing is presenting evidence where we have been treated less favourably, and in relation to disability, where we are treated unfavourably. If we are treated less favourably, it's evidence that we applied for training, we applied for promotion, we applied for secondment, or something that would develop our career, we applied to go on holiday, to take holiday leave, and other people appear to have been treated more favourably, let's say consistently, and we have reason to believe that our less favourable treatment arises from our gender reassignment or our LGBT status. If we have reason to believe that, we record it, we write a note, we tell somebody, and then we act, we make a formal complaint. I hope, and I'm sure that HMRC does not do what some organisations do, which is then seek to mediate these matters. They should never be the subject of mediation. They should be the subject of your formal disciplinary processes. If somebody treats you less favourably, it's called discrimination. And it should not be mediated. You might mediate a final outcome, but the actual allegation, where you have evidence, you have to collect the evidence. And if you are, this is another important point about new law, about discrimination by perception. If you are treated less favourably because somebody perceives that you're L, G, B, or T, you are similarly protected in law from such discrimination, but again provide the evidence, the instances in which you were treated less favourably. That should be acted upon. And I suppose, and I'm not disagreeing with what was said in that excellent introduction. It set the scene, but I suppose my mindset is about moving away from us as a special case to be protected, but as one of a number of, and we're not groups, you know that we're now, we're no longer strands, we have protected characteristics. Lovely language. Don't know where on earth it came from. Actually, Alison's here. I think she can or we'll be here later. You can ask her. We have these protected characteristics, and if we're treated less favourably, there's no hierarchy. It's not some are more important than others. They are all of equal significance, but we've got to provide the evidence. So if we're treated less favourably because somebody perceives that we are L, G, B or T, we have a right to have something done about it. And I think, certainly in my experience, most people, when making complaints about discrimination, do not want their colleagues sacked. What they do want is for the behaviour to stop. Am I correct there? Yes. I believe so. But the fear is, if we complain, somebody may get sacked, and therefore we don't complain. So it does behove your HR departments to have procedures that are, let's say, proportionate. Because if you think your colleague is going to be sacked because they've made a very naff joke, which may be harassment, chances are you will do what we always do, which is we'll swallow it, we'll say, you know, it's not worth making the effort and getting embroiled in what could be very contentious and personally hurtful to us to bring a complaint. Well, that's not actually very useful because it doesn't change the environment. And it means that we further, and I don't want to use suffer, because those of us who are LGBT, and those of us who are from visible ethnic minority communities, and those of us who are disabled where it is evident, are long used to insults, slights, hurts. I'm not suggesting we ought to be, but the fact is we survive mainly by shrugging it off. Now, that is also, there's a cost, a personal cost. Therefore, we have to create environments in which it is possible for us to raise our concerns, for those concerns to be investigated in a fair and proportionate way. And at the end of the day, if there's evidence to support somebody has done something which is a breach of your policies and indeed the law, they should have the opportunity to apologise, to learn from their mistakes, and to get on with their job duly admonished. rather than dismissed, except where we may have a pattern of behaviour and somebody who has, I call them serial apologisers, you know, those people who are always apologising. I think the duty of care on the employer is to get rid of such a person because they make the organisation vulnerable. And should such a case ever get to an employment tribunal where it is clear that this person has offended on a number of occasions and with little sanction, then I think the onus would fall on the employer to prove that they hadn't created an environment in which discrimination, harassment has occurred. So, looking at the culture in which all allegations of discrimination, harassment, victimisation occur, in part, I think, means everybody knowing their own rights and everybody knowing their own duties and responsibilities. So it means everybody who works for your organisation, there's quite a few of you. How many is it? Hundreds of thousands? 67,000? Yeah. 67. Well, okay, it's smaller than it used to be then. Yes. In my day, it was bigger, but then we didn't have so much as a computer. We had adding machines. I'm not joking. If you remember back to the early 70s. 67,000 people is a lot of people, and I fear it may become smaller, yes, in the coming period. So one is working in an environment which will be a lot of pressure, but it doesn't alter the need to comply with the law. And the law exists, and it has been fought for. It wasn't simply given. The law exists to provide for the human rights of all of us. The human right of an individual to reassign their gender is something we must all fight for. The trans community is relatively small compared with the, certainly, lesbian and gay. And there is also a small out-bi community who often don't get heard, don't get the opportunity to express their views and concerns. But we're not in a competition here. What I would say is that we should be and are standing together, and we should be standing shoulder to shoulder with others with these protected characteristics so that we don't allow people to play divide and rule between one form of discrimination and another. I have personal experience of seeing this happen. It is neither, it's not pretty, but actually more to the point, it is so destructive and it takes our agenda backwards, which is why I am now going to mention somebody's name I mentioned earlier to a colleague. I'm going to mention Julie Bindel, a woman who I know as a feminist. I've done a couple of television and radio programs with her, and frankly, I am shocked. I'm not surprised, I am shocked that what she advocates is wholly contrary to the law of this country in terms of transgender. And her logic absolutely fails me. If it is acceptable for her to argue that we should treat trans, particularly her issue is trans women, if we should treat trans women less favourably because they're trans, then why is it not acceptable for a bed and breakfast owner to fail to provide her and her partner with a service because they don't like lesbians? Either we have a law that protects all of us, or we end up having a law that protects none of us. So I'm very keen that we act in solidarity, that we work around our common goals of what is underpinned by the human rights legislation, around all protected characteristics. I think, and I've argued this for some time, it's a kind of new politics that I'm not quite able to articulate, and possibly there are members of a certain political party who are no longer in power who might embrace the idea that equality is a reasonable agenda on which to unite people. The things we have in common as well as what makes us distinct. Otherwise, well, I don't really want to get in any kind of politics, because what we're talking about is how we can use the issues within your employer, within the organisation that is HMRC. But the lessons of my experience is that we focus upon the law and not simply seeking to change attitudes and opinions. Changing attitudes and opinions around race has clearly not worked. And one example of it is that ghastly word, I know you use it, forgive me if I appear to be criticising you, but I'm going to do it anyway, BAME. Black, Asian, minority, ethnic. Let me tell you something. I know where on the map Asia is. Tell me where black is. Those of us who are not white and who are not Asian might actually be African. So if we're going to have African, if we're going to have Asian, can we have African? So African, Asian, and then we have minority ethnic. To save ink, wouldn't ethnic minority do to cover us all so that we haven't got some kind of hierarchy in which you have black first and Asian comes next? And it's very, very, very dangerous to go down that kind of road. And we could do the same around LGBT. Which order we'd put them, what's more important. We either stand together in solidarity or we are capable of being picked off one against the other. I loathe the term BAME because I love the term black as an inclusive term for anybody who is fighting racism. And so I have known and been in organisations in which people who appear to have white skins, that may be Palestinian, whatever, are standing together to fight racism. I don't personally care whether the word is black, but some word that includes all of us who wish to fight being treated less favourably because of our colour, our nationality, or ethnic or national origin, which, by the way, is the definition of what is captured by the word race. So a Welsh person who is treated less favourably because they're Welsh is the subject of racism. It is not less racism or more racism, it's racism. One definition. It's quite important, I think, to understand what the law says, how it protects us, what it doesn't do. And it doesn't, one of the things the law does not do is it doesn't protect us from people who don't like us unless their actions are discriminatory. But I've had people come to me wanting my advice. How do they take a case against somebody who doesn't like them? You don't, is the answer. If you can find anywhere in your job description that says, and you have to be liked by everybody, or indeed that you have to like everybody, we don't. What we do have to do is comply with the law that requires us not to treat any person who has a protected characteristic less favourably. Personally, I'd extend that to any person, whether they've got a protected characteristic or not. So I hear jokes made about people who have red hair. I hear jokes made about men who have no hair. People think it's funny. I'm a bit sensitive about it. But why are we picking on this person? Because they don't conform to this norm. So I wouldn't want to make it unlawful to make jokes at the expense of bald men, but I would personally hope that we can extend our own understanding and our respect for the humanity of every human being to see the person and not one thing about them. Or even, now that we have combined or dual characteristics, a combination of things about them, what we should be aspiring to and what we can help create is an environment in which we are able to be out about all of the things that are important and significant to us. That's what I think we aspire to. There are ways of doing that, and I would suggest to you that anonymising data collection is useful. As in, it is encrypted, you capture it, it is not on a person's file unless they choose it to be, but it increases confidence. If a person feels that they're not ready to be out now, but they do want to be, as it were, registered, they don't want to be out in their workplace, they want to be registered, they may complete the electronic monitoring questionnaire. But it has to be, and what we recommend, because we've designed such a thing, is that it is only used in organisations where there are more than 500 staff, and it is never brought down to, as it were, regional level, because you still could identify who a person is in a particular office. So we do it, as it were, globally. We'll tell you from the data X percentage of your workforce answered this question or that question. These are only, some questions are not encrypted because you are required to collect the data or have done anyway through people's national insurance, and so you know their ages, etc. But I think it's quite important to build the confidence and trust of your workforce for them to know that there are more than 600 members of the service who are LGB or T. Of course, anecdotally they know it, but we might actually have year on year an increase if it were anonymised. But we must create an environment, and I'm mindful of the time, and I just want to say something about the issue of knowledge of, a new concept that arises both on disability and on pregnancy and on gender reassignment. The employer must have knowledge of the status in order that they can exercise their duty to provide degrees of protection. If they don't know, and by knowing, it's easier for trans women than it might be for trans men. One of the criteria for having knowledge of is that one day you may come to work in a suit and the next day you might come to work in a dress. By wearing a dress, a trans woman is making a statement which is giving knowledge of. There's no ambiguity. I think it is going to be problematic for some trans men and women to disclose where they, to their manager. I don't necessarily mean to their colleagues, but what we must create, or we seek to create, is an environment in which a person might voluntarily come out to everybody. That's the environment. That's the challenge, both in relation to their trans status and indeed their lesbian, gay or bisexual status. For me, that is an aspiration, but it will be, and it should remain, a matter of personal choice. Nothing compulsory about when and where and whether we come out. I think it would be fair to say, largely out. But there are some situations in which I simply do not mention my sexual orientation because it's not appropriate. I don't want to. So other people might be interested, but it's not on the agenda. It's not what we're talking about today. Well, actually, it is what we're talking about today, but do you see what I mean? Now, this is a bit subtle. It's about like black people not always wanting to talk about being black, you know, or even Spurs fans not always wanting to be talking about being Spurs fans. We have choice, but what we must aspire to is a society in which, an environment in which, when a person, if a person chooses to tell you something important about themselves, they will not be treated in a less favourable way. That's surely a reasonable aspiration to work to, and one I could frankly see happening as your work progresses, as other work progresses across the public service and elsewhere. I think I've said enough. Thank you.